Well, vadis, chapter 42. Vinicius had barely time to command a few slaves to follow him, that springing on his horse, he rushed forth in the deep night along the empty streets toward Laurentum. Through the influence of the dreadful news he had fallen, as it were, into frenzy and mental detraction. At moments he did not know clearly what was happening in his mind. He had merely the feeling that misfortune was on the horse with him, sitting behind his shoulders and shouting in his ears, "Rome is burning," that it was lashing his horse and him, urging them toward the fire. Laying his bare head on the beasts' necks, he rushed on in his single tonic alone, at random, not looking ahead and looking no notes of obstacles against which he might perchance dash himself. In silence, and in that calm night, the rider and the horse, covered with gleams of the moon, seemed like dream visions. The Idumean stallion, dropping his ears and stretching his neck, shot it on like an arrow past the motionless cypresses, and the white villas hidden among them. The sounds of the hoofs on the stone flags roused dogs here and there. These followed the strange vision with their barking. Afterward, excited by its suddenness, they fell to howling and raised their yaws toward the moon. The slave hastening after Vinicius soon dropped behind, as their horses were greatly inferior. When he had rushed like a storm through sleeping Laurentum, he turned toward Aradia, in which is, as in Aricia, Bovil, Bovivil, Bovilae, and Ustranium, he had kept the relays of horses from the day of his coming to Annium, so as to pass in the shortest time possible the interval between Rome and him. Remember these relays, he forced all the strength from his horse. Beyond Ardea, and it seemed to him that in the sky on the northeast was covered with a rosy reflection that might be dawn, for the hour was late, and in July daybreak came early. But Vinicius could not keep down a cry of rage and despair, for it seems to him that was the glare of the conflagration. He remembered the consul's words, "The whole city is on sea of flame," and for a while he felt that madness was threatening him really, for he had lost utterly all hope that he could save Lygia or even reach the city before it was turned into one heap of ashes. His thoughts were quicker now than the rush of the stallion. They flew on ahead like a flock of birds, black, monstrous, and rushing despair. He knew not, it is true, in what part of the city the fire had begun, but he supposed that the Trans-Tiber division, as it was packed with tenements, timber yards, houses, storehouses, and wooden sheds serving as slave marts, might have become the first food of the flames. In Rome, fires happened frequently enough. During these fires, as frequently, deeds of violence and robbery were committed, especially in the parts occupied by a needy and half-barbarous population. What might happen, therefore, in a place like Trans-Tiber, which was the retreat of a rabble collected from all parts of the earth? Here the thought of Ursus, with his preterhuman power, flashed into Vinicius' head, but could be but what could be done by a man, even were he a Titan, against the destructive force of fire? The fear of servile rebellion was like a nightmare, which had stifled Rome for whole years. It was said that hundred thousands of those people were thinking of the times of Spartacus, and merely waiting for a favorable moment to seize arms against the oppressors in Rome. Now the moment had come. Perhaps war and slaughter were raging in the city together with fire. It was possible even that the Praetorians had hurled themselves from the city and were slaughtering a command Caesar. At that moment the hair rose from terror on his head. He recalled all the conversations about burning cities, which for some time he had been repeated at Caesar's court with wonderful persistence. He recalled Caesar's complaints that he was forced to describe a burning city without having seen a real fire. His contemptuous answer to the Hellenos who offered to burn Antium or an artificial wooden city. Finally, his complaints against Rome and the pestilential allies of the Subura. Yes, Caesar has commanded to burn of the city. He alone could give such a command, and Tigellos alone could accomplish it. But if Rome is burning at command of Caesar, who can be sure that the population will not be slaughtered at his command also? The monster is capable even of such a deed. Conflagration, a servile revolt, and slaughter. What a horrible chaos, and a letting loose of destructive elements and popular frenzy. And all and in all this is Lygia. The groans of Vinicius were mingled with the snorting and groans of his horse, the beast, running on a road which rose continually toward Aricia, was using the last of his breath. Who will snatch her from the burning city? Who can save her? Here Vinicius, stretching himself entirely on the horse, thrust his fingers into his own hair, ready to gnaw the beast's neck from pain. At a moment a horseman At that moment a horseman, rushing also like a whirlwind, but in the opposite direction toward Antium, shouted as he raced past, Rome is perishing! And on he went. The ears of Vinicius came only more expression. Gods, the rest was drowned by the thunder of hoof, but that expression sobered him. Gods. Vinicius raised his head suddenly and stretching his arms toward the sky, filled with stars, began to pray. Not to you do I call whose temples are burning, but to thee, thou thyself hast suffered, thou alone art merciful, thou alone hast understood people's pain, thou didst come to this world to teach pity to mankind, then show it now. If thou art what Peter and Paul declare, save me, Lygia. Save for me, Lygia. Take her in thy arms, bear her out of the flames. Thou hast the power to do that. Give her to me, I will give thee my blood. But if thou art unwilling to do this for me, do it for her. She loves thee and trusts thee. Thou dost promise life and happiness after death. But happiness after death will not pass away, and she does not wish to die yet. Let her live. Take her at thy arms. Bear her out of Rome. Thou canst do so unless thou art unwilling. And he stopped, for he felt that further prayer might turn into a threat. He feared to offend divinity at the moment when he needed favor and mercy most. He was terrified at the very thought of that, and so as not to admit to his head a shade even of threat, he began to lash his horse again, especially since the white walls of Aricia, which lay midway to Rome, gleamed up before him in the moonlight. After a time he rushed at full speed past the Temple of Mercury, which stood in a grove before the city. Evidently, people knew of the catastrophe, for there was an uncommon movement in front of the temple. While passing, Vinicius saw crowds on steps and between the columns. These people holding torches were hastening to put themselves under protection of the deity. Moreover, the road was not empty or free, as beyond Ardea. Crowds were hurrying, it is true, to the grove of by-side paths, but on the main road were groups which pushed aside hurriedly before the onrushing horsemen. For the town came sounds of voices. Vinicius rode to Aricia like a whirlwind, overthrowing and trampling a number of persons on the way. He was surrounded by shouts of Rome is burning, Rome is on fire, may the gods rescue Rome. The horse stumbled, but reined in by powerful hand, rose on his haunches before the inn, where Vinicius had another beast in relay. Slaves, as if waiting for the arrival of their master, stood before the inn, and at this command ran on before the other to lead out fresh horse. Vinicius, seeing a detachment of 10 mounted Praetorians going evidently with news from the city to Antium, sprang toward them. What part of the city is on fire? Inquired he. Who art thou? asked that decurion. Vinicius, a tribune of the army, an Angustian. Answer on my head. On thy head. The fire broke out in the shops near the Circus Maximus. When we were dispatched, the center of the city was on fire. And the Transtiber? The fire has not reached that Transtiber yet, but it is seizing new paths every moment with a force which nothing can stop. People are perishing from heat and smoke. All rescue is impossible. At this moment they brought the fresh horse. The young tribune sprang to his back and rushed on. He was riding now toward Albanum, leaving Alba Longa and its splendid lake on the right. The road from Arisia lay at the foot of a mountain, which hid the horizon completely, and Albanum lying on the other side of it. But Vinicius knew that on reaching the top he should see not only Bovilii and Ustrinum, where fresh horses were ready for him, but Rome as well, for beyond Albanum the low-level Campania stretched on both sides of the Appian Way, along which only the arches and the aqueducts ran toward the city, and nothing obstructed the view. From the top I shall see the flames, said he, and he began to lash his horse anew. But before he had reached the top of the mountain, he felt a wind on his face, and with it came the odor of smoke to his nostrils. At the time, at the time, at the same time, the summit of the height has become gilded. The fire, thought Vinicius. The night had paled long since the dawn has passed into light, and on the nearer summits golden and rosy gleams were shining, which might come either from burning Rome or the rising daylight. Vinicius touched the summit at last, and then a terrible sight struck his eyes. The whole lower region was covered with smoke, forming as it were one gigantic cloud lying close to the earth. In these cloud towns, aqueducts, villas, trees disappeared, but beyond his grey, ghastly, plain city was burning on the hills. The conflagration had not the form of a pillar of fire, as happens when a single building is burning. Even when the greatest size, that was a long belt, rather shaped like the belt of dawn. Above his belt rose a wave of smoke, in places entirely black, in places looking rose color, in places like blood, in places turning in on itself, in some places inflated, in other squeezed and squirming like a serpent which is unwinding and extending. That monstrous wave seemed at times to cover even the belt of fire, which became as narrow as a ribbon. But later this ribbon illuminated the smoke from beneath, changing its lower rolls into waves of flame. The two extended from one side of the sky to the other, hiding its lower part as at times stretched the forest heights the horizon. The Sabine hills were not visible in the least. To Vinicius it seems at the first glance of the eye that not only the city was burning but the whole world, and not living being could save itself from that ocean of flame and smoke. The wind blew with growing strength from the region of the fire, bringing the smell of burned things and of smoke, which began to hide even nearer objects. Clear daylight had come, and the sun lighted up the summit surrounded the Alban lake. But the bright golden rays of the morning appeared as if were reddish and sickly through the haze. Vinicius, while descending toward Albanum, entered smoke, which was denser, less and less transparent. The town itself was buried in it thoroughly. The alarmed citizens had moved out of the street. It was a terror to think of what might be in Rome when it was difficult to breathe in Albanum. Despair seized Vinicius anew, and terror began to raise the hair on his head. But he tried to fortify himself as best as he might. It is impossible, thought he, that a city should begin to burn in all places at once. The wind is blowing from the north and bears smoke in this direction only. On the other side there is none. But in every case it will be enough for Ursus to go through the Janiculum gate with Lygia to save himself and her. It is equally impossible for the whole population should perish, and the world-ruling city will be swept from the face of the earth with its inhabitants. Even in captured places, where fire and slaughter rage together, some people survive in all cases. Why then should Lygia perish of a certainty? On the contrary, God watches over her, he who himself conquered death. Thus reasoning, he began to pray again, and yielding to fixed habit, he made great vows to Christ, with promises of gifts and sacrifices. After he had hurried through Albanum nearly all of whose inhabitants were on roofs and on trees to look at Rome, he grew somewhat calm and regained his cool blood. He remembered too that Lygia was protected not only by Ursus and Linus, but by the apostle Peter. At the uh, at the mere remembrance of this, fresh solace entered his heart. For him, Peter was an incomprehensible and almost superhuman being. From the time when he heard him at Ostrianum, a wonderful impression clung to him, touching which he had written to Lygia at the beginning of his stay in Antium, and every word of the old man was true, or will show it is true hereafter. Hereafter, the nearer acquaintance which during his illness he had formed with the apostle heightened the impression which was turned afterward into fixed faith. Since Peter had blessed his love and promised him Lygia, Lygia could not perish in the flames. The city might burn, but no spark from the fire would fall on her garments. Under the influence of sleepless night, mad riding, and impressions, a wonderful exaltation possessed the young tribune. In this exaltation all things seem possible. Peter speaks of the flame, opens it with a word, and they pass injured throughout an alley of fire. Moreover, Peter saw future events, hence beyond doubt he foresaw the fire, and if that is how could he fail to warn and lead forth the Christians from the city, and among others whom he loved as he might his own child, and a hope which was threatening every moment entered the heart of Vinicius. If they were fleeing from the city, he might find them in Bovillae, 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 or meet them on the road. The beloved face might appear any moment from out the smoke. We watched stretching more widely over all the Campania. This seemed to him more likely, since he met increasing numbers of people who had deserted the city and were going to the Alban hills. They had escaped the fire and wished to go beyond the line of smoke. Before he had reached Ustrianum, he had slackened his pace because of the throng. Besides, pedestrians with bundles on their backs. He met horses with packs, mules, and vehicles laden with effects, and finally litters in which slaves were bearing the wealthier citizens. Ustrinum, Ustrinum was so thronged with fugitives from Rome that it was difficult to push through the crowd. On the market square, under the temple porticos, and on the streets were swarms of fugitives. Here and there people were erecting tents under which whole families were to find shelter. Others settled down under the naked sky, shouting, calling on the gods, or cursing the fates. In the general terror it was difficult to inquire about anything. People to whom Vinicius applied either did not answer, or with eyes half bewildered from terror answered that the city and the world were perishing. New crowds of men, women, and children arrived from the direction of Rome every moment. This increased the disorder and outcry. Some, gone astray in the throng, sought desperately those whom they had lost. Others fought for a campaign place. Half-wild shepherds from the Campania crowded to the town to hear news, or find profit in a plunder made easy by the uproar. Here and there crowds of slaves in every nationality and gladiators fell to robbing horses and villas in the town, and to fighting with the soldiers who appeared in defense of the citizens. Junius, a senator whom Vinicius saw at the inn surrounded by a detachment of Batavian slaves, was the first to give more detailed news of the conflagration. The fire had begun at the Circus Maximus, in the part which touches the Palatine and the Cillian Hill, but extended with incomprehensible rapidity, and seized the whole center of the city. Never since the time of Brennus had such an awful catastrophe come upon Rome. The entire circus has burned, as well as the shops and houses around it, said Junius. The Aventine and Cillian hills are on fire. The flames surrounding the Palatine have reached the Carinae. Here Junius, who possessed on the Carinae a magnificent insula filled with works of art which he loved, seized a handful of full dust, and scattering it on his head began to groan desperately. But Vinicius shook him by the shoulder. My house too is on Carinae, said he, but when everything is perished, let it perish also. Then recollecting at that advice Ligia might have gone to the house of Aulus, he inquired. But the Vinicius Patricius on fire, replied Janus. The Transtiber? Janus looked at him with amazement. Never mind the Transtiber, said he, pressing his aching temples with his palms. The Transtiber is more important to me than all other parts of Rome, cried Vinicius with vehemence. The way is through the Via Portuensis, near the Aventine, but the heat will stifle thee. The Transtiber I know not. The fire hath not reached it, but whether it is not there at this moment the gods alone know. Here Junus hesitated a moment and said in a dull voice, I know thou wilt not betray me, so I will tell thee that this is no common fire. People were not permitted to save the circus. Oiga. When houses began to burn in every direction, I myself heard thousands of voices exclaiming, Death to those who save. Certain people ran through the city and hurled burning torches into the buildings. On the other hand, people are revolting and crying that the city is burning at command. I can say nothing more. Woe to the city, woe to all laws, and to me. The tongue of man cannot tell what is happening there. People are perishing in flames or slaying one another on the throng. This is the end of Rome. And again he fell to repeating, Woe, woe to the city and to us. Vinicius sprang to his horse, and hurried forward along the Appian way, but now it was rather struggling through the midst of a river of people and vehicles with wash flowing from the city. The city, embraced by a monstrous conflagration, lay before Vinicius as a thing on the palm of his hand. From the sea of fire and smoke came a terrible heat, and the uproar of people could not drown the roar of the hissing of flames. Hissing.